Hi, I'm Kim here in Northern California. My property is City Oasis, 2.5 acres here in Zone 9B, and boy, are we loving this beginning of spring. This video is number 2 in a 4-part series all about bare root fruit trees. So if you're thinking about planting bare root fruit trees this year, then you need to watch this series because it has all kinds of essential information that will really help you do a good job, make sure your bare root fruit and nut trees really thrive in their new home. Video number 2 explains 5 things that you really need to be aware of before you buy your bare root fruit and nut trees. So let's get started. Now here are 5 things you should think about before you buy your fruit trees. First of all, does the fruit tree you want to get need a cross-pollinator? A lot of them do. Yes, some will say they're self-fertile, but usually they'll have a little asterisk and say, however, these trees are much more fertile if you have a cross-pollinator, and then they'll give you a list of ones that are suitable. Now, again, not all trees need this, but you definitely need to be sure before you just order one tree. In most cases, having a couple of varieties, even if it's not absolutely necessary, will indeed increase production. The second thing you need to be aware of before you order any fruit trees is that some of them, along with some vines and other plants, need a male and a female. And if you're ordering seedlings, you're not going to know which one you're getting, by the way. So I have a few trees like this, including my monkey puzzle tree. I did a video on that a few months ago about monkey puzzle trees, and wow, they're just the most unusual trees, really odd and intriguing shape and structure. And then when they're older, they give you these huge pine nut-like nuts. But yes, they need a male and a female or they're not going to produce any nuts. So that's something you definitely want to check out. A vine that's like that, for instance, is kiwi. You need a male and a female. So there are some fruit trees like that, but not a lot. Still, be sure what you're getting and what you need before you order. The third thing you need to think about before you place an order for fruit trees is what chill hours does this fruit tree need? Because some trees, say cherries for instance, need a set number of chill hours or they are not going to produce any fruit. Now you might think if you live in an area with a mild winter like I have here in Zone 9B, we have only had freezing temperatures, meaning just barely 32 degrees Fahrenheit, twice so far this winter. Other than that, we have been staying in the low 40s pretty much at night, sometimes even a lot higher. But I found cherry trees that don't need that many chill hours, and those are the ones I ordered and planted. 2 of those are Stella and Rainier. So don't worry, there are a lot of varieties of trees that have differing numbers of chill hours, as well as different harvest times. So that's a little bonus I'll give you. I mentioned that in my last video on not getting overwhelmed with too much fruit. The key there is to order trees that are of the same variety, like say peaches, that have staggered harvest times throughout the summer and fall. And even looking at your orchard as a whole, you can do that. I'm going to have my plums and pluots in the spring, my peaches, my pears, and then apples in the fall. You know, you can think that way. But if you're growing a lot of fruit trees, you have to get a little more detailed and look at each variety and say, I don't want all my apple trees fruiting at the same exact time. So you're going to want to stagger it. And you can do that with pretty much all your fruits. You just pay attention to the details, which leads us into the next thing that you need to be aware of before you order your fruit trees. And that is the climate or zone that your fruit trees are suited for. Now, I will say that you can stretch the boundaries. I do this a lot. But what's funny is I'm usually stretching it on the other end that most people stretch it. As in, most people are in a much colder climate than me. And so let's say the fruit tree says it's hardy to zone 6, but they're in zone 5 and they try to stretch it down to 5 so it will, overwinter and not have an issue. Well, there are ways of doing that. Extra mulch and microclimates on your property where it's warmer, say by a southern wall of your house, that type of thing. In fact, I do that with a few trees too. But for the most part, the kind of stretching boundaries that I have to do refers to these trees supposedly only are hardy to zone 8, and I'm in 9B, which means pretty much that they can't handle the dry, intense heat we get for so many months of the summer and into the fall. But If I really want to grow a tree that says it's really only hardy to zone 8 and doesn't do well, doesn't thrive when it goes higher than that, then I just have to think creatively and I pick a spot on my property where it gets afternoon shade. And I have found success with that for, say, my loquat tree. Now, the fifth thing that you really need to think about before you place your order for your bare root fruit trees or your potted fruit trees is this actually something I'm going to be eating, not just right now, but say 5 years, 10 years down the line? If it is something that, say, you don't even like, but your child likes, and they're 15, in 5 years when they're 20 and probably gone, well, what are you going to do then with your, say, hundreds of apricots you don't like? Well, there are many ways you can deal with that. You can preserve them. You can make apricot jam or stewed apricots and then give them as gifts. You can invite your son over to do a harvest himself and take them home. You can give them to the community food bank. You can maybe host a U-Pick and let people come and get their own, or just have your family and friends over to collect some. But it's still something to think about. Don't order and go to all the effort of establishing a fruit tree if you actually think you might not enjoy all the fruit that tree produces in the many years to come. I mean, that space could be used for other trees that you would enjoy a lot more, right? So, are there any disadvantages to bare root fruit trees? Well, I can really only think of 3, and they're really not disadvantages. They're just things you need to be aware of so you can plan for them. The first one is that bare root fruit trees are only available during a narrow window of time, which depends on where you live. For instance, for me, in Northern California, Zone 9B, the local nurseries are selling bare root fruit trees right now, and they'll get more and more of them in this month, February, and then more in March. But after that, we're not going to see any, probably by mid-March, because then it's too late here. Spring and fruit tree blossoming happens quite early in my area. On the other hand, if you're up north or somewhere in a colder climate, then you're not going to have bare root fruit trees available, whether online to ship to you or in a local nursery, for quite some time still, because there's no point in them sending them to you until your ground is ready to be planted. And if your ground is frozen, it's definitely not ready for a fruit tree to go in it. So you have to be very, very precise in when you order. Here's the secret. If you're ordering online, you have to order early. You can't wait until March or April to order, because most of the fruit trees, probably the ones you want to get, are going to be gone by then. You want to order as early as the fall, but definitely by the end of January, beginning of February, even if that nursery is not going to send them to you for another couple of months. So you need to get going right now if you're in one of those colder climates. And if you're like me and you haven't ordered yet, call those nurseries before you order. Make sure they still have those plants in stock and then order immediately. Or, in my opinion, better yet, go to a local nursery, if you've got one, that carries some good fruit tree stock, and pick out what you want right there. One of the fun things and good things about getting a bare root fruit tree is that you get to prune it yourself. And pruning a bare root fruit tree, well, it should be pretty drastic. You're going to want to cut it pretty short and let all the new scaffolding branches sprout out from where you cut it off, so you have a much lower level to harvest from. I mean, that is one of the big perks of a backyard orchard culture rather than a commercial orchard, is that the harvesting is so much easier because you have the trees so much lower in their fruit production, where you can reach them quite easily. All right, on to what could be seen as a second disadvantage of bare root fruit trees, and that is when you get them, you have to plant them pretty quickly. Now, I will say you can hold them for a bit, for maybe 5 to 6 days at most. I mean, I've heard of some people doing it for more than that, but you're really risking it. Ideally, get them planted within a day or two. What you want to do when you get them is do not leave them in their box, or however you brought them home if you got them at a local nursery. Immediately dig a little trench. If you haven't done it already, I'd suggest you prepare in advance, and lay those bare root fruit trees in that trench at a diagonal, and then cover the roots up with mulch. You don't want those roots exposed. You don't want those roots to dry out. You want to wet that mulch down. You can put, under the mulch, you can put a bunch of newspaper. Often when they come in the mail, they'll come with newspaper all around them, and the newspaper really holds the water in. But a good mulch will do the same. You need to have them in the shade, not where any random winter sun can get to them, because that'll dry them out right through any mulch or newspaper. So have them in the shade, and yeah, definitely get them planted as soon as possible. The third thing that could be seen as a possible disadvantage is that bare root fruit trees do usually take a year longer to start fruiting than a potted fruit tree. That's simply because potted fruit trees have been kept in the nurseries a year longer. Generally speaking, any bare root fruit trees that don't sell in the winter and early spring at your local nurseries, they will then just pot up and hope to sell the next year. They'll pot it up, let it grow throughout the summer, maybe sell an occasional one, and then the next spring, they're going to try to sell them at a lot more money. Now, yeah, you get fruit usually a year earlier. I will say I've had bare root fruit trees bear for me the very first year, but in general, you're going to get fruiting a year later with bare root fruit trees. So stopping this video here, but do remember that all the things discussed in this video, they're all super important for you to consider before you go ahead and invest in any fruit and nut trees with your hard-earned money, as well as your time, energy, and heart. Now, wherever you are, have a wonderful week, and until next time, happy growing.